This is episode 426 of That Shakespeare Life.
Hi, I'm Jennifer Jorm, PhD student at the University of Queensland. Another great method for studying the life of William Shakespeare includes listening to this. It's That Shakespeare Life with my friend Cassidy Cash.
Welcome to That Shakespeare Life with Cassidy Cash. Cassidy believes that if you desire to successfully learn or perform Shakespeare's plays, then understanding the real life and history of William Shakespeare himself is a must. That Shakespeare Life is the podcast that helps you go beyond the curtain of some of Shakespeare's most iconic works and explore the world of early modern England as Shakespeare would have lived it, learning from the writers, historians, and performers who know it best. And now, here's Cassidy.
In Shakespeare's England, the middle of summer was a time of celebration. While the summer season begins at May Day, the longest of the year, from June 23rd until June 24th, was celebrated as the holiday of Midsummer. And it was Christianized as St. John's Eve and St. John's Day. It was the longest day of the year, and for the life of William Shakespeare, this holiday was marked with celebrations of feasting, dancing, and bonfires. Shakespeare himself immortalizes the spirit of the festivities in Twelfth Night when Olivia says, "Why, this very midsummer madness." Here today to help us unpack what midsummer celebrations would have been like for the 16th and 17th century, as well as to explain for us how seemingly heathen celebrations for the summer solstice lined up with a decidedly religious celebration of the venerable St. John. Our guest and historian Bill Petro is here to take us inside the history of midsummer. Bill Petro is an experienced independent historian whose work bridges culture, technology, and the history of ideas. Following a successful career in the technology industry, Bill now focuses on public history, researching, writing, and sharing well-contextualized narratives through his long-running blog, billpetro.com, and through his podcast, Friendly Neighborhood Historian. Links to both are included in today's show notes. Hello, Bill. Welcome to That Shakespeare Life.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm delighted to be here.
What day of the year would have been celebrated as midsummer for Shakespeare's lifetime? And is that date the same one that's considered midsummer in the 21st century?
No. The short answer is no. It's celebrated on June the 24th, but it's associated with the summer solstice. And as we know, the astronomical solstice is on June 20th or 21st. So off by just a couple of days.
So Shakespeare would have celebrated it on the 20th or 21st because he would have been basing it on the astronomical solstice. Is that correct?
No, he would have celebrated on June the 24th.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we had the two sorted.
It goes back to the Julian calendar and the kind of early celebration of the summer solstice, the Fortuna, which was the celebration during this midsummer period of time.
In the 16th century, the historian John Stowe recorded festivities for celebrating midsummer, and he described the event as one where friends and neighbors would gather together and there were tables full of food and drink and even bonfires. But he also enumerates a lot of decorations that would have been hung up for the occasion.
That's right.
To me, I'm wondering, Bill, what would have the decorations have been? I mean, what were the specifics if we were diving into a celebration of midsummer in the middle of the 16th century? What would we have seen?
Sure thing. One of the practices was putting food outside, and as people would wander by, you might choose to invite them into your house. We do that sometimes on Halloween. We just put the candy outside and we may invite the kids in. But John Stowe, back in the 1500s, said that every man's door, being shadowed with green birch, long fennel, St. John's wort, orpin, white lilies, and such like, garnished upon with garlands of beautiful flowers, had also lamps of glass with oil burning in them all night. Some hung branches of iron curiously wrought, containing hundreds of lamps, lit all at once, which made a goodly show.
I can imagine it would. That sounds exciting even today to have. I love we call it wrought iron here today,
Yes.
but the iron curiously wrought, that would be what they're speaking of. There's a decorative iron with when he's saying lamps, I'm not sure if he's saying candles or oil lamps, because you mentioned oil burning all night, but some kind of luminary attachment. They're very similar to Halloween. I think that's a pretty apt comparison.
Yes. And there were torches associated with it as well, because Saint John was a burning and shining light and the preparer of the way of Christ. Bonfires were big. There are a number of holidays in England that have bonfires associated with them. Guy Fawkes Day, for example, on November the 5th. But there were three kinds of bonfires. One was clean bones, no wood. That was called a bonfire. Clean wood, no bones. That was called a wake fire. And then bones and wood was called the St. John's fire, because that would scare off dragons, which poison wells and springs. And so there was a bit of a superstition. Now, other things associated with the celebration of that would be dancing. There would be a summer lord or a summer lady, sometimes called Robin Hood. He was more of an organizer, a fundraiser, and a festive leader. But there would be dances with Robin Hood and Maid Marian. Sometimes Friar Tuck would dance with her. They'd have scarves on their heads, bells on their ankles. They would build an arbor to cover the Summer Queen or the May Queen. There would be role-playing, dressing in green, sometimes cross-dressing, stage combat, football, sports, all kinds of things associated with that. You may remember in the theatrical version of Peter Pan, the Lost Boys build a hut for Wendy. Well, during Midsummer, you would build a hut or an arbor to cover the May Queen or the May Lady.
One of Shakespeare's most famous plays has to be A Midsummer Night's Dream, and it's known for its chaotic energy and wild costumes. Shakespeare himself refers to the chaos of Midsummer in Twelfth Night when Olivia says, "This is very midsummer madness." Bill, explain for us the chaos of this holiday. Why was it considered a crazy time of year, and what behavior or customs made it stand out as particularly chaotic compared to other times of year?
So there were 4 times of the year, 4 quarters of the year, that were associated with solstices and equinoxes. Even in ancient times, those were easy to identify with astronomical devices like Stonehenge. And this was the summer solstice, which means the days now were going to grow shorter, the daylight, the nights were going to grow longer. So solstices and equinoxes, equinox means when the daytime and the nighttime are equal, those were always big holidays going back to ancient times. And there was lots of celebration and, let us say, the removal of inhibitions during this time. What Shakespeare did, though, which is curious, is he set this in a dream.
Which stands out as significant because why?
Well, I think it is because a dream talks about the edge of the liminal and subliminal states, or that place between waking and sleeping. You might remember in the movie Hook, Tinkerbell says to Peter, between waking and sleeping, when you remember your dreams, that's where I'll be waiting for you, Peter. And I think Shakespeare wants to pick up on the idea that you are between the liminal, the awake, and the subliminal, the dreaming. How do you know which is true? Maybe it's all true. That's a device, a literary device that you could have lots and lots of fun with.
And makes so much sense that he would paint it that way, given what we know about Midsummer being the literal line between day and night, with the daytime and the nighttime being the same length. Brings that into sharper focus for sure. In Shakespeare's play As You Like It, Rosalind says, quote, "He would have lived many a fair year, though hero had turned none, if it had not been for a hot midsummer night," end quote. And the title of Shakespeare's Midsummer play does, as you've mentioned, include the word dream. And this might, by extension, be a reference to sleeping at night. But were nighttime and dreaming, or potentially wild things that could happen during that nighttime dreaming, was this a theme of the holiday, or was this a connection that Shakespeare made artistically?
No, it was a theme of the holiday. The idea of dreaming and magic was very popular, especially during the Midsummer. One of the nobility wrote a book called Demonology, and it talked about 4 different kinds of demons. The 4th one were called fairies, and fairies had the ability to prophesy of the future. So the idea of magic things happening, fairies in particular, witchcraft and witches, all of that was very much associated with the Midsummer celebration.
Now, you've explained for us how Midsummer is a celebration of the summer solstice, but this day is also celebrated as St. John's Day, or the birthday of St. John the Baptist. And you alluded to this earlier when you were telling us about St. John's fire and warding off of the dragons. But explain for those that are uninitiated with this connection, how do these two seemingly opposing celebrations work together?
So what's interesting is you might ask, is there some conflict between them? And the answer is no, any more than when sometimes we celebrate Christmas on the same day that we celebrate Hanukkah. Which one do you celebrate? Well, it kind of depends upon your orientation. So St. John's Day celebrated the birth of John the Baptist. We know from the New Testament gospel account that John was the cousin of Jesus, who was born 6 months ahead of him. So if John is born on Midsummer's Day or June the 24th, Jesus being born 6 months later would have been December 24th or 25th. So that's the connection of the date. John is kind of unusual in that we celebrate his birthday. Most Saints' Day in the church calendar celebrate the death day of saints, the martyr of saints. And we know that all of the New Testament saints, with the exception of St. John, the other John, John the Evangelist, all of them died as martyrs. And so those saint days are usually celebrated associated with their death, but not St. John. It was on his birthday, kind of like we do with Martin Luther King Jr. Day.
As you're listening to our conversation, if you'd like to go a little deeper into the episode, I invite you to step inside That Shakespeare Society. Over at the companion page for this week's show at CassidyCash.com/episode 426, members can explore historical artifacts, primary sources, and period paintings related to A Midsummer Night's Dream and the celebrations of Midsummer from the 16th and 17th century, along with some extra behind-the-scenes research content that doesn't fit into the audio. This month, Bill Petro is an invited guest inside That Shakespeare Society, which means if you have questions you want to talk to him about directly, you can post that right now inside the Society notes and join our conversation there. Visit CassidyCash.com/episode 426 and look for the Society notes. Click on Step Inside to explore alongside our conversation. And now, back to the show. I think I was confused by this because the celebration of a saint, whether it's their birth or their death, seemed like a Catholic thing to do. And I was surprised that this would have been celebrated in Shakespeare's England when, especially under Elizabeth, it was pretty dangerous to even have suspicion of being Catholic. So why were they acknowledging St. John's Day as something that was not only celebrated, but in such an ostentatious way?
That's a really good question. And it relies on a little bit of understanding of what Elizabeth I did with the Anglican Church, the Church of England. As we know, it is her father, Henry VIII, who broke from Rome, but he was not as Protestant as Martin Luther, who was his contemporary in Germany. His son, Edward, was very Protestant. John Knox was one of his advisors. But when he died, his half-sister, Mary I, was very Roman Catholic because her mother was Catherine of Aragon, the first wife of Henry VIII. And during that time, she persecuted Protestants such that they fled. Now, when she died and her half-sister Elizabeth I came to power, she had to figure out how to deal with the returning Protestants at the same time as the Catholics who were already in England. So she came up with something called the Via Media, or the middle way. So the High Church of England was very Catholic in its appearance, genuflections, vestments. It's called bells and smells. Incense, it looked very Catholic ritualistically and liturgically. The lower church of the Church of England was kind of a watered down Calvinism, Puritanism. So she had to wrestle with both of those sides in the celebration. For the most part, the saints' days moved over from the Roman Catholic Church into the Church of England.
Well, when Shakespeare was celebrating this, would he have called it St. John's Day or would he have called it Midsummer?
He would have called it both, depending on the context he was in. If he was at church, he would have called it St. John's Day or the feast of St. John the Baptist. But it was clear that it was that time of year that was also midsummer.
What about the Puritans? I mean, did they have a problem with this holiday? They generally have a problem with all holidays.
They had a problem with all holidays. The Puritans were staunchly Calvinistic, and they had one holiday and one holiday only. It was called the Sabbath. They remembered the Sabbath to keep it holy, one of the 10 Commandments. And so for them, the Sabbath was a time of worship, but it was the only holiday they celebrated. They did not celebrate Christmas because there was too much revelry and drunkenness and celebration during that time. So no, the Puritans celebrated none of the holidays, and you could be jailed for celebrating Christmas. Certainly, you would have been in trouble for celebrating this holiday if you were a Puritan.
Now, you've talked to us about a lot of different decorations, including things like bonfires, festive dancing, elaborate decorations, the wrought iron lamps. All of this seems like celebrations that would have required a great deal of space, which makes me think it would have been more fitting in the countryside than in, trying to pull all that off on the cramped spaces of a city like London. But maybe I'm wrong. Did these celebrations happen in both locations, or was this primarily something Shakespeare would have celebrated when he was home in Stratford?
A very good question. Yes, the answer is both. So a maypole, for example, could be set up in the city square, and people would dance around it. There were parades. The guilds, different craftspeople, would have parades, and they would feature giants or unicorns, kind of like what we would call floats. And they would dress up. And these parades might happen in London, or they might happen in a smaller town like Stratford-upon-Avon. So the answer is yes, it was celebrated in both places. Now, when we think of May Day, we think of a single day, but that was not the case back then. They called it the May, and it went from the holiday, the feast day of Pentecost, all the way to Midsummer. And it included a series of holidays: Trinity Sunday, Pentecost, Corpus Christi Day. So the celebration could have lasted much longer than simply a single day. In fact, you might remember from Camelot, where Guinevere says, "Tra-la, 'tis May, the lusty month of May." So when everyone goes blissfully astray. So the celebrations went on for more than a single day.
What events from the play A Midsummer Night's Dream reflect these kind of celebrations from the holiday? Are there any items included in the play that stand out as specifically not part of the actual celebrations, but maybe Shakespeare included in his story anyway, or vice versa, where you can point and say, when the characters do this, that really would have happened in real life?
Well, I think what probably didn't happen is the Prince of Athens marrying the Queen of the Amazons. That probably didn't happen on St. John's Day and Midsummer Nights and Midsummer Day. But many of the elements that you see in the play, A Midsummer Night's Dream, with fairies and magic potions and references back to Greco-Roman mythology. There's a magic potion made from a flower that was enchanted by Cupid's arrow, which causes the person, when they wake up, to fall in love with the first person they see. Now, that was certainly that idea of magic and love and romance. That certainly came from practices associated with Midsummer. The idea of romance and confused identities. People would dress up. Sometimes they would cross-dress. Sometimes they would wear costumes, and there would be confusion around that. We see that with the two couples in A Midsummer Night's Dream, where the wrong people are falling in love with each other. It's all straightened out in the end, of course, but there's lots of confusion and identity confusion going on.
If you're new to the history of midsummer celebrations from the 16th and 17th century, or if you're coming to A Midsummer Night's Dream and want to better understand what's really happening on stage, here are a few excellent places to begin. First, Litha, Celebrating the Summer Solstice by John Matthews. This book offers a clear and approachable introduction to the traditions, symbols, and seasonal beliefs surrounding midsummer. Things like bonfires, plants, magic, and the idea that this time of year existed as this in-between moment when the normal rules of daily life felt looser and transformation seemed possible. Second is the book Understanding A Midsummer Night's Dream by Faith Nostbakken. This is a historically grounded guide to Shakespeare's plays that places it firmly within Elizabethan social life, popular culture, and festive traditions. It'll help you understand how Shakespeare's original audiences might have interpreted the play when they saw it for the first time. And third, A Midsummer Night's Dream, Texts and Contexts. This is edited by Gail Kern Pastor and Skiles Howard. This edition is of the play itself, but it pairs the play with historical documents and primary sources from Shakespeare's world. This allows you to read the play alongside the cultural material that would have been informing it in real time for Shakespeare's lifetime. I'll place links to all of these resources in the show notes for today's episode, so stay tuned for the URL for where to find those. Well, there's obviously several pages of history to unpack here, from exploring the play itself to looking into the history and practices of Midsummer. And I know from your work into doing this research, you're probably sitting on a list of great ideas. Can you suggest for us some places we should start if we're new to exploring the history of Midsummer and we want to explore further? What should we consider first?
I would say two things. One is, who were the patrons, the royal patrons of William Shakespeare? And that would be Elizabeth. He was born during her reign, Elizabeth I. And what's interesting about Elizabeth is she lives during the high Renaissance in England. Now, the Renaissance had started about 100 years earlier in northern Italy, and we see it moving north into France, and you see that in the architecture. The Renaissance, in terms of architecture, didn't really come to England in the same way, but literature, theater, and art were big parts of the English Renaissance, and Elizabeth was one of the patrons of that. She was very likely involved with the Globe Theatre, which is just south of the Thames. I've been to plays there. So when she died, she was replaced in 1603 by James I. And it would be good to study the difference between Elizabeth and James. James also was a patron of Shakespeare. In fact, he had a number of players called the King's Men that he sponsored. And then the last thing would probably be the religious aspects of the Puritans. They did not exactly agree with what was going on with Elizabeth and the Anglican Church. Some of them stayed in England, and as you know, some of them came to America in 1629 by the tens of thousands and settled in Boston and Salem. So those would be the three things I'd look at: Elizabeth, James, and the Puritans.
Those are excellent places to look into. Do you have any suggestions for specific book titles or websites that might be the place to look for finding these things?
Oh, there are tons. One might be my website, billpetro.com, where I do write about these people. But even a quick look at Wikipedia would be very helpful and not take very long.
Bill, we ask everyone this next question here at That Shakespeare Life, and that's, what's the one book you would take with you on a deserted island? My friends in England tell me I'm supposed to allow you the complete works of Shakespeare and a copy of the Bible, so your choice would be in addition to those.
Well, very good. And the question is, which Bible would it be? Would it be the King James Bible? If I had to pick something other than those two sets of works, I would pick J.R.R. Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Life-changing books. I've been reading them for 60 years. They change my view of the world every time I read them.
I think that's a really good selection, and it complements the other two choices. So I could see where you'd be well set up on your deserted island for sure. So what's next for you? What are you working on now that you're excited about?
Well, I just finished writing an article on Tolkien because his birthday was January the 3rd, just a couple of weeks ago from the time we record this. But right now I'm working on an article on Jane Austen. She was born 250 years ago in December. It's probably going to be a multi-part article on her life, how it affected her characters, and how she was not just a romantic writer, but also wrote about politics and slavery. And then I'm working on a series of articles on the US 250 celebration. This year's the 250th anniversary of the writing of the Declaration of Independence. And I'll have articles on the Founding Fathers, the Revolutionary War, and things like that.
How exciting to be diving into such fun pieces of history and looking into what can be uncovered there. Thank you so much, Bill Petro, for helping us explore the background and context of Shakespeare's Midsummer celebrations from the 16th century and how that should inform our understanding of one of his most famous plays. Thank you so much for being here to share it with us.
You are quite welcome indeed. If we shadows have offended, think but this, and all is mended, that you have but slumbered here while these visions did appear, and this weak and idle theme is no more yielding, but a dream. Gentles do not reprehend, if you pardon, we will mend, and as I am an honest puck, if we have an unearned luck, now to scape the serpent's tongue, we shall make amends ere long, else the pucker liar call. So good night unto you all, give me your hands if we be friends, and Robin shall restore amends.
All the resources we've talked about in the show today, including more information on our guest and related podcast episodes you might enjoy if you're looking to explore Midsummer even further, are all listed for you right now on our companion page at CassidyCash.com/episode 426. That's CassidyCash.com/EP426. That Shakespeare Life is researched and produced by me, Cassidy Cash. Our audio engineer is Gary Mayholm. That's it for this week. Thank you for listening. I'm Cassidy Cash, and I hope you learned something new about the Bard. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening to That Shakespeare Life. As always, the best conversations happen after the episode over at CassidyCash.com. Become a part of a vibrant Shakespeare conversation by adding your voice over at the website. Until next time, remember, when you want to know William Shakespeare, you have to go behind the curtain and into That Shakespeare Life.